Good morning. Welcome, all of you that have joined us today for our June NTSA Tech Grove Connect webinar. We do these webinars, we do 8 of them throughout the year. The Central Florida Tech Grove in partnership with NTSA. And in every one of them, we are highlighting the team, the innovation, and the story behind one of the best paper, best tutorial nominees or winners from the previous ITSEC. So today, as all of you know, we're delighted to focus on medical trauma simulations. And our guest from the University of South Florida, just down the road from us at Tech Grove, we are based in Orlando, Florida. I want to take just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Tech Grove and Team Orlando for those of you that may not be aware of the depth and the extent of the defense modeling, simulation, and training industry anchored in Orlando and who we are as the Central Florida Tech Grove. Team Orlando is a very unusual collaboration of federal and state agencies, all with a physical presence here in Orlando in the Central Florida Research Park, anchored by the 4 large services, Navy, Army, Air Force, Marine Corps. And you see a lot of logos there designating other federal and state organizations that are members of Team Orlando to collaborate, to share information, to jointly seek solutions to needs for human performance in our military, and to build on collectively relationships with industry and academia. Yeah, we have the 4 commands here representing each of the services. Some of you may have heard it has been officially announced that Space Force, their training command, is officially at Patrick Space Force Base, not too far from us. They do have folks on the ground in Orlando and will be coming in as a customer of Tech Grove. These are some of the other federal organizations that are part of Team Orlando. You see Defense Health Agency there, which funds a lot of work in this area, as well as a number of other organizations. And we truly are a community geographically and in the work that we do together. Literally in the Central Florida Research Park, all of those organizations that you saw listed on that chart are physically located on this campus, side by side in many cases with the University of Central Florida expertise in human performance. So it is a wonderful environment to collaborate and share ideas and share needs. This slide is just to illustrate that every month there are activities and initiatives and opportunities for engagement with the local Team Orlando community, with industry, with academia. You can see the cadence there. Some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with TSIS, which is coming up next week, with ITSEC. The Innovation Harvest Day is an event that Tech Grove executes on. And in fact, our next Innovation Harvest Day will be in July, showcasing about 24 companies in medical simulation. So you can watch our website and find out more about that or get on our email list. So who is Tech Grove? Just really briefly, we are a DoD-funded innovation center. Many of you are familiar with innovation centers such as AFWorks, SoftWorks, DefenseWorks. There's a huge community of us out there. We are focused on human performance. I'll show a slide here in a minute that shows our swim lanes, if you will. What does set us apart somewhat from our peers in this area is the fact that we are funded by all 4 services and multiple entities from the Navy and the Army. We have 2 other customers that are coming in that will be joining us in FY25 that are going to really expand our ability to provide you as industry and academia with opportunities to engage in human performance for DoD. And this is our focus area. You see the 3 pillars there. There's a lot that underpins all of these areas, as you know, and some of these areas, particularly the immersive technologies, the AI, synthetic training environment. We had questions submitted related to all those topics, so we'll be part of the discussion today. Our mission at Tech Grove is to do these 3 things. It's to grow the defense industry base so we can continue to meet the rapid innovation, cutting edge technology needs for our warfighters. It is to support the transfer, access to intellectual property and expertise in our government labs that we support, as well as to support companies like some of you that may have SBIR awards, other transaction awards to help give you visibility. Example of that is our upcoming SBIR Partnership Day next week. And to find solutions. We are executing on more and more initiatives to actually scan the horizon, engage companies, engage academia in tech scans, market studies, prize challenges to find solutions for our customers. This is just a list of some of the types of activities that we do. Again, the message mainly being that we provide lots of opportunities for you to engage here with the broader defense simulation and training community. Just a few examples of the fact that we are doing a lot of those things. You see there our June events flyer that is on our website. We have our Citrus Talks coming up next Monday. Unusual opportunity to hear from two of the Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division lab leads to hear about the areas of research that they're working on, problems that they're trying to solve, opportunities to engage with them. You can find this information on our website. Invite you to register. Many of our events are hybrid, so you are welcome to attend no matter where you are if you can't be here in person. We are supporting a NATO organization and offering an opportunity for those of you working in AI to apply to be considered to present at this next big thing, AI showcase that will take place at the 24 ITSEC event in December. You'll find this on our website as well, and a form for you to apply to have this very unusual opportunity to showcase your capabilities for training and simulation. And then a prize challenge that we have on the streets for the Naval Surface Warfare Center that is around this combat continuum training education for watchstander positions. I hope that you will all take a look at that and consider applying to actually participate and develop a prototype, minimal prototype or simulation to submit to potentially win a good bit of money. This is an actual page that you'll see on the prize challenge once you go through and get to the idea scale platform where you actually submit to apply. There's a recording of an information session we did on Monday that will provide a whole lot of information on that. And we welcome your questions on that. Just connect with us. If you're not on our email list, go on our website, fill out the contact us form so you can be aware of all the opportunities we offer. You'll get our emails. We're very active on social media because we want to offer you opportunities to, this webinar is certainly one, but many opportunities to actually physically and on very specific needs engage with our customers at TechGrow. All right, with that, we're going to get on to the main reason we're all here today, and that is to hear Shannon talk about the extraordinary work that she's been doing over at the University of South Florida, which she'll tell you a little bit about the extensive work that they do, as does the University of Central Florida, in medical simulation and training. And in this case, particularly the very deep relationship they have with SOCOM, who funded this work. And this was one of the best paper nominees at ITSEC. So Shannon, it's all yours. Let me say one more thing. Thank you for all the questions you submitted. Shannon will be addressing some of those questions in her narrative or in her presentation. Some of the questions were already answered in her presentation. There is a Q&A function on this platform. If you have a question you would like to submit during this webinar, please put it in the Q&A. We will be monitoring that and answering as many questions as we can over the next 50 minutes or so. This is being recorded. The recording will be up on the NTSA website within the next 48 hours. If you would like to go back and see it, if you'd like to share it with anyone, you will be able to access the recording of this TechGrow Connect webinar as you can all the previous ones we've done. All right, Shannon. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about a project that we did and sponsored by SOCOM, which was developing criteria to compare military medical trauma simulations across modalities. But first, I like to start with an overview. I'll be going into a little bit more depth on my background, my research background, and then the background of the simulation center that I work for now. Before I get into the current study, which was the project that we did for SOCOM, looking at the capabilities of different simulation modalities. Then I'll give an update of what's happened since ITSEC, and then there were some submitted questions that I pulled out to answer that we can do, as well as the live Q&A questions. So first, just a little bit of background. I have a PhD in human factors and cognitive psychology. I think this audience probably does know what human factors is, but for people who don't, I like to say that human factors is the study of people within systems. And I like to think of it as making technology safer and easier to use. And then cognitive psychology is how people think and learn. So I've been combining these two areas of study for the past 15 years now in developing and testing different training simulations. I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Education at the College of Medicine at USF, as well as a senior human factors scientist at USF's Center for Advanced Medical Learning and Simulation. So first, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on my research and some projects I've done in simulation training. So the first simulation training that I worked on was actually a serious game for the Army back in 2009 when I was a student. But then I later worked for the Navy, a civil service, shout out to NOC-TSD in Orlando, where I was fortunate enough to get to work on many different types of simulation training, including some early work in virtual reality training. So you can see a picture on the left there. That was a VR trainer that we did for the arresting gear, which is this big piece of machinery that's at the end of a short runway that stops a plane. So we were developing maintenance training procedures and training for that. And also, VR has changed so much since we worked on that project over about 10 years ago now. I was also fortunate that I got to work on some computer-based adaptive trainers, such as the periscope operator training that you can see there, and also another close air support trainer. And several of the projects that I was able to help with, they were delivered to military schoolhouses, and this periscope trainer actually was delivered to the submarines as well. So then after working for military simulation training, I transitioned to working in healthcare simulation training. I worked in industry for several years as part of a small business. And then a couple of years ago, I made the full circle transition back to academia, where I joined USF as a tenure track research professor, where I study emerging technologies for healthcare simulation, including the picture that's in the bottom right there. You can see this is virtual reality simulation training for obstetrical emergencies for rural healthcare providers. So areas where they might not have an expert locally to do the training. How do we provide that training from an urban simulation center to the rural environments? And we're looking at how do we use immersive technologies to do that. Which leads to the research that we're doing and the work that we're doing at CAMELS today. CAMELS is the Center for Advanced Medical Learning and Simulation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit direct support organization for USF. And our building actually is a 90,000 square foot facility in downtown Tampa. We're one of the largest medical simulation centers in the world. And we can provide a variety of controlled or clinical environments or surgical environments for almost any type of healthcare simulation training. And just to give a scope of the work that we do, last year, USF provided almost 200,000 instruction hours and served over 32,000 learners from across different healthcare disciplines. And then at CAMELS is my lab where I study different emerging technologies, including extended reality for healthcare simulation. So that leads to how we got started on the project that was presented at ITSEC last year. So SOCOM had a research question, really, which was they wanted to be able to compare different medical trauma simulators for combat casualty care training. And they wanted a more objective way of comparing different simulations across the wide variety of simulation types that exist. So that's what led to this project that we conducted last year and then presented at ITSEC. And I would first like to thank the team that worked with me on this, particularly Dr. Brannick. He just retired, but we would not have gotten through the dozens and dozens of analyses that went into the 170-page report that we presented to SOCOM without his help. So very grateful to the team that helped out on this. So a little bit of background, what is combat care? So combat medics, they must learn to perform life-saving medical procedures, often under difficult conditions, such as in active combat, austere or challenging environments, and in complex multi-casualty situations. Since the introduction of tactical combat casualty care training, which is often referred to as TCCC or TC3, I'll be using all of those throughout, but I'll try to just say combat care so I don't have to get bogged down in acronyms. But since the introduction of combat care training in the 1990s, preventable combat deaths have been significantly reduced, and the TCCC standards are continuously improved as the medical evidence advances. A recent scoping review found that combat casualty care training, there was a highlighted need for continued efforts to improve the efficacy and efficiency of care to increase survival rates, including recent surveys that found that combat medics desired more training opportunities, both pre-deployment and then between deployments, to reduce the peacetime effect. And this is the known degradation of skills that happens during periods of lower combat intensity that have historically led to proportionally worse outcomes for early casualties in a new conflict. So to meet this need, simulation training is used. And what do we mean by simulation training? So this was one of the questions that was submitted, which is, what is simulation training? Healthcare simulation does differ from other areas of simulation training that I've worked in before, but there's a wide variety of different types of simulation training, which we refer to as modalities. So you can see some pictures there, and these are general pictures. They weren't from the actual study that we did, but just to give a sense of the variety, you can see there are full body mannequins there, and they can be both low or high fidelity, and that usually refers to how much technology is in the mannequins. You can also have low and high fidelity task trainers, and task trainers are usually just a body part or part of a task where it's not the full body mannequin. We're just performing a few select tasks on that trainer. There's also virtual and augmented reality, which in this study were split apart into two separate areas, but they go under the umbrella of extended reality, which is sometimes referred to as mixed reality. So here I'll try to just refer to them as virtual and augmented reality, but just know that those definitions are kind of in flux right now. There are also serious games, and these are typically computer-based simulations. Healthcare also training also involves a lot of oftentimes role players or standardized patients. It can involve cadaveric training and as well as animal models, including live tissue training, which I would refer to here as LTT. There's also moulage, which is the makeup and special effects that can be added to either a role player, standardized patient, or to any of the mannequins or task trainers to help to increase the visual fidelity of the simulation. And the simulation modalities that we included in this study are listed in that table there. So there are so many different types of simulation modalities. You have to make different considerations when choosing what is the right modality for the training that you're trying to conduct. So these are typically the considerations that I would start with when choosing a simulation modality. First is just resources, and this is not just referring to the cost of the simulation or to conduct the simulation, but also it includes your space available and also your time and or expertise. So does the simulation require an instructor or moderator to be there? Does it, it could be standalone where it doesn't require a moderator, but if it does, do you have that instructor's time? It could also require different skill levels, such as moulage skill levels, if you're including role players. If you have bad makeup and bad special effects, it can really take people out of the simulation. Do you have trained role players there? Because if the role players aren't very good, the standardized patient doesn't have a certain level of training, then you might not reach the level of engagement or realism that you're going for. This all leads to the question of scalability, of course, which is how many learners do you need to get through this training and how many can participate at one time? What's the potential turnover time? If you need to reset a simulation, how long does that take? If you need to reapply makeup, how long does that take? And then that is related to the simulation's reusability and durability. So some of the high fidelity mannequins, for example, they might not be as durable. So you might not want to take those out on field exercises. And then also some things like cadaveric models are highly realistic for training, but you're not necessarily going to be able to reuse those for many different trainees. There's also the question of interoperability. So what other systems do you use, and does the simulation need to interact with those systems? And then there's a big question about fidelity and what level of fidelity do you need? Fidelity can mean so many different things when it comes to healthcare simulation. A lot of times people are referring to physiological fidelity. So does it breathe and bleed like a human being? But they could also be referring to anatomical fidelity. So are the landmarks there where they should be for a human, which might be different for a mannequin might not have a landmark that would be necessary to do a certain type of training. Or animal models might differ from how human anatomy looks. And so I prefer to use the term functional task alignment from the literature instead of just fidelity, because this refers to how closely does the simulation match the task that you're trying to train. And this could be different levels of physiological or anatomical or visual fidelity, but it's really getting at the point of how closely can we get the simulation to the training performance. Because ultimately, yeah.
I'm curious, I know there's been increasing attention paid in recent years to medical simulation manikins models that were more specific to gender. So because that obviously has an impact too. So do you have a few comments about that?
Absolutely. There's been some really fascinating stuff in combat casualty care, specifically with including more female models, because people, you would place different medical things in a different location for a female model than a male model. And also they found that combat medics were a little bit less, they weren't as fast at derobing the female models as they were for the male models. So I think it's really important to consider the context for what are you trying to get in the transfer training, the actual on-the-job performance. How do we introduce the training at the simulation level that gets people to those on-the-job performance outcomes more effectively or efficiently?
Thank you.
Simulation model modalities, they're not one size fits all, as we mentioned. There was a recent NATO report that said, even though that looked into healthcare simulation modalities, that even though there are advances in simulation and immersive technologies, there still is not a single environment linking realism, haptics, and emotional connections. So there's not evidence that there's a superior modality yet. So they recommended considering a blend of modalities depending on available resources. But what was important from this research was that they identified the needs to benchmark standards for simulation modalities. So this can help developers to identify what needs to go into a simulation. And then this helps the military or other healthcare educators to be able to say, here's what we need to purchase or include into our simulations in order to get to a certain types of training outcomes. And then that would lead to development of guidelines for integrating simulation modalities into training curricula. So to meet these needs of trying to say how do we compare different simulation modalities? How do you compare a cadaver to virtual reality training to a mannequin trainer? We wanted to conduct this exploratory study to evaluate the capabilities and limitations of simulation modalities for TCCC. So our aims of this study were first to develop the evaluation criteria so that we could compare both the quantity that was included in each of the capabilities of the simulators, and then also the quality of the simulators, and try and be more objective with that. Then we conducted a study in which combat medics evaluated different simulation modalities presented by industry developers as part of an existing technical experimentation event. So we were very fortunate to be able to include this data collection with an existing TE event. And then we compared the simulation capabilities both on the quantity of the capabilities across different modalities and then on the quality of the capabilities, which I'll get into how we developed the evaluations next. So first, the evaluations were developed to quantify the degree to which a simulator could provide training for a specific task. So we would list out all of the task steps for a particular medical task and then say, okay, this trainer can do 80% of those steps. And how we did that, we looked at quantifying the capabilities through cognitive task analysis of the simulations. So these were step-by-step evaluations of the simulation capabilities for the 12 medical tasks that created a tally of how much of a task could be done by simulation. And I have details into the cognitive task analysis on the next slide. Following the quantifying of the capabilities, we also looked at the quality, where we had the same combat medics rate the different simulations on different parameters of how appropriate they were for a given medical task, which I'll get into the details of those next. And just so if you're wondering, the 12 combat casualty care tasks that we were looking at included this list here. I won't read through all of them, but we did task analyses for everything from chest tube to needle chest decompression to hemorrhage control. And we took a modified cognitive task analysis approach. I really like the Cannon-Bowers task analysis approach from this 2013 paper, where they basically look at these 5 different key parts of a simulation. What are the cues used to perform each step? What's missing from a simulation to perform that step? What are the expected trainee errors on a step? And then how can you observe the trainee doing that step? Or what would you need to know that they did that performance correctly? And then what are the key cognitive decision-making components of each step? So that led to our modified task analysis approach, which I'll go over a little in more detail here than I would normally, but just to give you a sense of how we developed the evaluation criteria. First, each task analysis differed based on the steps required for the task. So obviously those 12 tasks are different. So we had 12 different checklists. First, for each of the steps of the 12 tasks, we listed those from the existing military doctrine. So we listed the steps from the TCCC assessments, the soldier's manual, trainer's guides, and other doctrine that we had from our subject matter experts. So that answers one of the submitted questions, which is where did we, do we use any existing military doctrine? And the answer is yes, because the steps that were marked as critical in those were then marked as critical on our step checklist. Then for each of those, each checklist listed the steps in performance order. The evaluators were asked to mark whether the simulator included that step. So for each critical step, the evaluators were asked whether a simulation allowed a trainee to make an error for that step, which is important because if a trainee can't make an error on a critical step, you don't know whether they can do it correctly or not. So for example, if you're doing a needle chest decompression in a virtual reality simulator and there's only one collision area where you can place the needle in VR, if you're not able to place it in the wrong spot, then the simulator isn't providing the ability to mess up on a critical step. So we had the evaluators mark whether there was a critical step and then whether that critical step could be messed up. For each of the critical steps, we also listed the sensory features that were typical cues needed to make a decision about that step. So sensory features included important visual, haptic, or auditory information that you needed to know for that step. So for example, if a medical task requires the identification of a body landmark to place a needle in the correct location, the body landmark cues might be important haptic information that you need to feel in order to know where to place a needle correctly. So sensory cues for each critical step were determined by the subject matter experts in combat casualty care that we worked with, as well as features that were identified from previous research. So there was one study that we used that had almost 400 combat medics who rated the importance of different features of medical simulators. So we tried to combine all the known information into these were important cues.
Shannon, were these all soft special operations medical?
For our study, they were, yeah.
Okay. Would you have anticipated anything different if you'd had Army or some other service?
So I think context is really important. I think military simulation training has so many different types of context that I think it's more about what is the specific learning objective for a specific training versus how much it differs branch to branch or even civilian to military. I think that just the context of each specific training really needs to be taken into consideration. And so the last part was that if a sensory feedback was provided, so if you saw, for example, if you placed a tourniquet correctly and the bleeding stopped, that would be a visual feedback that you got showing that you had performed the task correctly. So those were the tallying up how much of a simulation of the task a simulator could perform with the task analyses. We also looked at the quality using subjective evaluations. So we had the evaluators, who were the combat medics, rate their agreement on 4 different subscales for 14 different questions total. So the 4 subscales were acceptability of the simulation for a task, the realism of different features of that simulation, the reusability and deployability of the simulation, and then the simulator's ability to measure performance. Unlike the task analyses in Section A, the Section B questions were the same across all the tasks. So we didn't have 12 different ones for Section B. We just had one Section B for all the tasks. And we created these questions based on the best practices literature and the mastery learning principles literature. And the evaluators rated agreement on these 14 items on Likert type scales from 1 strongly disagree to 5 strongly agree. So then we did the data collection. As part of a 5-day TEE event, the developers were given a list of 12 combat casualty care tasks, and the industry developers chose which tasks they wanted to bring to the TEE event. 33 combat medics evaluated the 27 simulations that were brought for these 12 different tasks. For each simulation, the medics were asked to evaluate both the task analysis, Section A, and then their subjective evaluation, Section B. And medics were asked to evaluate the current capabilities, not future potential capabilities. We did have 33 experienced medics who were attending the TE event who were participants of the data collection for the research question as well. These were active duty, retired, or reservists from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They had an average of 13 years of military experience. All of them had medical experience with almost 12 years of medical experience. A majority had experience treating live casualties in a combat environment. Most of them were medical instructors with over 4 years of instructing experience. They were between the ages of 21 and 52, and all were male. So what we did was during this TE event, we divided the combat medics, who are the evaluators, into 4 smaller groups of 8 to 9 medics. All the groups had similar years of medical experience and a mix of military branches. This was to allow the developers equivalent time with the small groups to talk to all of the medics. So every developer had 45 minutes with each group to present their simulations. After 45 minutes, there was a reset period of 15 minutes, and then the group switched rooms and evaluated the next developer. This repeated until each of the combat medic groups reviewed each of the simulators by the industry developers. There were 27 total, but I do want to note that not all 27 were included in these analyses because they might have chosen to bring just a presentation, a briefing, or they chose a task that wasn't on one of the 12 tasks that we sent them as part of the evaluation. So next, we analyzed the data. I wanted to note here that we made an a priori decision not to include simulations that received less than 7 responses from the medics on their evaluations, just to reduce some of the statistical biases that happen with fewer responses. So you won't see moulage or role players included in the following analyses. If you are interested in the full analyses, we do have the full 170-page report that was released publicly by SOCOM earlier this year. So what I'm going to present today is only the task analyses collapsed across all the tasks, and the subjective evaluations collapsed across all the tasks. So first, getting into the task analyses. So what this graph on the left here shows are the capabilities that a modality has across all of the 12 tasks averaged out. So you can see on the bottom of the graph, the axis there, the first column is whether it included the critical steps. So A is critical steps. B is whether those critical steps allowed for critical errors. C, D, and E, those are the sensory features, whether those were included in the simulation. F were the non-critical steps, and G were total steps. So if you only care about looking at one part of the graph and you don't want to look at the whole thing, I would look at either the critical steps on A on the far left or the total steps on G on the far right. And you can see the different modalities there. LTT is the dotted line that's at the top, and you can see that it had a ceiling effect with very little variance and responses from the combat medics. So for most of the tasks, LTT could do most of the steps for the tasks. High fidelity manikins and cadavers were the next highest in terms of just overall capabilities that were included in a simulation, with low fidelity manikins combined with high fidelity task trainers in the middle of the scale. That's the larger dotted line in blue in the middle of the scale. AR and VR were both rated lower with higher variance, so the opinions of the medics varied a lot more on those modalities. We also wanted to note that although LTT had overall the highest percentage of steps included, other modalities also had greater than 90% of the steps, of the critical steps for most tasks. So for most of the 12 tasks, again, this is collapsed across all of them, the high fidelity mannequins and cadaveric models also had greater than 90% of critical steps. So, okay, I saw a question that just came in on what's an example of a low fidelity task trainer. So you can think of like training for airway intubation. If you've got a mannequin that you can do just the mannequin head that you can do airway intubation on, that could be a low fidelity task trainer if it's not giving you any other type of feedback. High fidelity would be if it's giving you feedback like it's providing some sort of feedback that you're in the wrong location with the placement, or there are CPR trainers that will tell you if you don't have the right depth or rate going on. So that would be more of a high fidelity where it's providing more information. You can really just think of it as like a continuum of high and low fidelity. But typically mannequins will, if they've got some sort of technology or some sort of sensors in them, we consider them higher fidelity, or if they have more realistic skin or something along those lines. So that was section A, the task analyses, how to quantify the capabilities that simulators had. This is the graph that is collapsed across tasks for section B, which are the subjective evaluations. So there were 4 subscales: general acceptability, realism, deployability, and measurement. And you can see those along the bottom of the axis of the graph there. The same pattern of results from section A we found for the subjective evaluations, where LTT was rated higher on the Likert scale items overall, with the high fidelity mannequins and cadaveric models next, followed closely by by the low fidelity mannequins and high fidelity task trainers. This was important though, which is that the higher ratings for realism were also often inversely related with their reusability, deployability, or availability. Like I was mentioning before, a high fidelity mannequin, you might not be able to drag around in a field exercise because it would be more easily damaged. So context for training is important because the simulator fidelity is often a trade-off with the durability and the practicality of using those simulations. So just to summarize from this pilot study that we did find significant differences in the capabilities of modalities for most tasks. This is overall how much percentage-wise that a trainer could do for a specific task. At least one and sometimes several simulations had greater than 90% of the critical steps for most tasks. LTT had the highest percentage of steps overall, but other modalities were very close with greater than 90%. More capabilities, the next highest capabilities were the high fidelity mannequins and cadavers, with low fidelity mannequins, high fidelity task trainers in the middle. AR/VR tended to be on the lower side. And this was the same pattern of results in section B with the subjective ratings of the quality of the simulators. But again, there was that trade-off between durability and practicality. I want to point out, though, that there are limitations because this is an exploratory pilot study. We would love to be able to reproduce these results. The study also coincided with a TE event, so we had limited experimental control over the simulations that were presented. We also provided consistent time with each developer, but the 45 minutes was either seen as too short or too much time, depending on what the developer chose to present. The evaluations were quite detailed, which led to evaluators to experience evaluation fatigue. We had a modest sample size with the evaluators of 33, but some of the developers had a lower response rate because of the evaluation fatigue. So in the future, we'd want to potentially restrict the number of developers that came, number of simulations we're asking them to evaluate, or number of medical tasks, just reduce some or all of those. And then also to reduce evaluator fatigue, we could use a different experimental design, such as a fractional factorial design. So not every single combat medic has to evaluate every single simulation. And then we would use the evaluator feedback that we got to refine these evaluations and methodology. And then finally, I do want to point out that we were looking at the relationship between the simulator capabilities. We weren't looking at then how those simulator capabilities actually transferred to trainee performance or on-the-job performance. So a simulator could have 90% of steps, but you might not need 90% of steps to reach the training performance level that you want to get to. 80% might be good, or 50% might be good, depending on what it is that you're trying, what your learning objectives are that you're trying to reach.
Is that a future phase of your work?
I would love to do that research. I don't have it currently on the books, but I would very much like to do this research.
Okay.
So conclusions for this part of the study, we were able to develop evaluations to quantify the capabilities and also the quality across different simulation modalities. Evaluators did perceive a meaningful difference in the quality of the simulations, as well as being able to mark the quantity of what was included in the simulations. But no modality was considered uniformly superior. All the modalities had trade-offs. So we found that context ended up being very important, and the intended learning outcomes to determine what the appropriate simulation modality is. Which leads to some of the work that's been happening after ITSEC. So first, this proceeding, everything that's presented here is now available in the published proceedings paper. If you're interested, there's a QR code there. I'll leave for just a second in case people want to take a picture of that.
I did put the link in the chat as well to the paper on the ITSEC archives. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll just skip ahead to the next part, which is that we published additional data since then in military medicine. And this was looking more into the perspectives of the combat medics. So we looked at a lot more qualitative data and analyzed that, which answers some of the questions that we got from the submitted questions ahead of time, which was one of the questions was, did we look at any learner engagement metrics? So we didn't specifically look at learner engagement metrics here because these were evaluators who were all instructors, they weren't learners. And they were evaluating the simulations, not seeing how much they could learn from the simulations. But we did ask them from their perspectives as combat medics what modalities they thought were more engaging. And that was really interesting. And it's published in this paper here because they did rate role-playing and moulage as really high on learner engagement. And this paper also addresses how simulations could be used in a crawl, walk, run training paradigm. So the combat medics did have a lot to say on when they thought different simulation modalities would be useful for different learner levels. So they think they indicated that the higher fidelity simulations, including cadaveric models, those should be only at the level of people who could get more out of those types of training. So you need to have done some basic and intermediate levels of training through different types of simulations before you're doing things that are going to be more expensive or more less reusable or higher fidelity. So they had this paper looked at their perspectives. And we've been doing a lot of work since then, partnering. So CAMEL's partners with different government, academic, and industry collaborators. So I put a few examples here, and these are definitely not an exhaustive list of the research that we're doing, but just some of the fun projects that I'm working on this summer. So one of the examples is we're looking at a comparison of haptic gloves in my lab, including different parameters for haptic feedback for different medical tasks used in training in extended reality or virtual reality. So some of those projects we're looking at what types of feedback are important for different types of tasks. Do you need to have the very high fidelity force feedback? Does it have to feel exactly like a human in order to get to the different learning outcomes? Or can you use just more basic vibration, tactile feedback in order to get to certain learning outcomes? So we're looking at for which tasks, which trainee levels, which combination of haptic feedback parameters are useful to get to learning outcomes. We're also looking at ways to improve distance simulation using immersive technologies. So we partner with several small businesses on SBIRs and STTRs, and these have been both NIH and also some DoD SBIRs, STTRs on work advancing some of those technologies. And I have worked with several of the collaborative groups in the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, looking at research reviews and developing guidelines for distance simulation. And this is really, distance simulation just means if the trainee is not in the same location as the trainer, or if the trainee is training remotely from like a simulation center. Another project that I'm excited about that's just getting off the ground is looking at using natural language processing models for feedback and to track team dynamics and team communication and performance in medical simulations. So we've got a data collection coming up right now with Uniformed Services University and the Army to look at how can we use models of NLP models that have already been developed, how can we apply those to healthcare simulation trainings. So these are just a few of the projects that I'm excited about, but we're always open to looking at projects with different partners, looking at emerging technologies in healthcare simulation and how do we get to better outcomes. So I saved some of the submitted questions in here, and thank you so much for the submitted questions. There were over 50, so I know I can't possibly answer them all, but I really appreciated a lot of them. And I tried to pull out the topics that there were several questions in the same topic. First, also, if there's anything related to creating DoD offices or requirements, those would be better answered by our government colleagues. I don't have insight on that, but I can talk to some of the questions. There were lots on AI and also the use of extended reality. So I pulled a couple of those out there, which I'll give my opinions on real quick, and then we can go to the live Q&A questions if there are any there. So what is the role of artificial intelligence in modeling and simulation? I love this question because I think that modeling and simulation has already been using a lot of AI or machine learning. I know that a lot of the research that was going on at TSU when I was there in adaptive trainers was looking at different ways that we can predict human performance. So there are other especially in the adaptive training literature and the intelligent tutoring literature, they've been using different types of machine learning, including natural language processing and different predictive models using the data that's collected from training to adapt training to meet the needs of the trainee, the level that they're at. So I think that a lot of that research has already been started in this community, and we're only building on it now. So I think that the role of artificial intelligence is there to stay, but it's already started. In simulation training. And then also that gets at the next question, which is there data to support different types of simulation training for different levels of learners? Yes, absolutely. So in the adaptive training literature, it's really interesting. Some of the research that we did was looking at feedback in different simulations, and depending on the level of the learner, you would adapt the type of feedback that you're providing to the trainee. So for example, a novice might need a lot more elaborative feedback than somebody who's a more skilled person in the training. And it actually might hurt people who are more skilled to get a lot of elaborative feedback because that increases the mental demand or cognitive load on them, which can cause an expertise reversal effect actually in training. So if you're providing too much feedback or the wrong kind of feedback to the type of learner. And then there's also other research on how to adapt like the difficulty of the content or the type of content depending on what people are good at or not so good at. There are also lots of questions on extended reality, advantages or disadvantages of extended reality. I will point again to the paper that was published in Military Medicine because you get the perspectives of the combat medics on and what they think the advantages and disadvantages are. My perspective is a little bit different as a researcher more generally in healthcare simulation. I think that XR has gotten a lot better since I started working in this area 10 years ago. Especially the visual quality, the resolution of what virtual reality headsets can give you now is so much better. Like I think when I first started working in with the Oculus Developer Kit 2, DK2, the resolution wasn't good enough to do certain types of like aviation training because you literally couldn't put like a plane on the horizon and have the resolution be good enough to see it. But of course, now the resolutions are so much better in these headsets. We've got really high fidelity, especially aviation simulation now. So I think where we're missing or still need to catch up is in the area of haptics and also soft objects. So in healthcare, especially, you're dealing with human bodies. Soft objects are harder to model both in the visuals and especially in the haptics than solid objects. So it's easier to model a cockpit with gauges and knobs and levers than it is to model a human body where you need to be able to tell the difference both visually and like haptically between like skin and muscle and bone. So I think that there's still a lot of room for improvement. We're in a really exciting era of immersive technologies where they're good enough that you can start testing so many different research questions, but they're not good enough in that everything has been solved and it's 100% real life holodeck kind of simulation. So it's exciting to be a researcher in this area right now. So I saved some more submitted questions, but I wanted to pause and see if we had any live questions.
There are a few. You answered one of them, Shannon. There was A couple early on, would you say the simulation considerations you've mentioned match with the considerations from those making purchasing decisions for technical combat training aids? Don't know if that's one that we can really answer, from the acquisition perspective.
Right. I don't have the acquisition perspective, but I can say that as a researcher, I hope that I'm just providing the data, the base data, to give you the information you need to make the decisions that make the most sense for your organization. So I'm not recommending any type of simulation. I'm just saying, here's what each of them have. Maybe the 50% capability is great for your particular need. It doesn't have to be 100% fidelity and high cost or whatever to meet all of the training needs. But here's the information, and then you can make the decision.
And then there's another one about how were the simulations that were tested selected? I would guess, the customer.
Right. It was a TE event, so it was the industry developers applied and then were invited by the TE group, which was separate from our group of researchers. So we didn't have as much control over what was shown as we would in a normal experiment, but I think that made it very interesting to see kind of more real world what's out there.
And then there's a question from Aaron. I'll let you take a look at that. Kind of gets to your point about that. There's so many aspects to medical training that are almost more, you've got emotions, you've got feeling, you've got the smell, you've got, just so many feel. There's interesting aspects to medical that present some challenges that other areas don't. So.
Yeah, I think to elaborate on that a little bit more, it's getting at like kind of the sensory fidelities there, and like how real does it need to be in order to be effective training.
Right.
I think that we've already shown in, at least in healthcare simulation more generally, that mannequin-based training is effective for a lot of tasks. And I think that mannequins, if you look at them, they do not look human. You definitely would not mistake a mannequin for a real human. So there's not that 100%, realistic physiological or anatomical fidelity. Often there's not 100% functional task alignment with a mannequin and the task that you're doing. So you can still learn on simulations that are missing different sensory cues. And so that's kind of the point of this study, which is how do we just compare what sensory cues or what capabilities are available in the simulations? And then the next step would be, okay, these are the differences in the simulators in terms of the quantity and quality of the simulations. How does that translate to actual transfer of training on the job performance? Because if we don't know how to even compare at baseline what's in a simulator, then how do we then say that those are the important pieces that are important for training outcomes?
Question about what kind of computer power is needed, and I would think that's variable depending on the modalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hate to be that person that says it depends, but yeah, it definitely depends. A lot of it's especially for the immersive trainings now, a lot of them can be done in standalone headsets, so you don't need a high-powered computer with you. If you're looking at more like haptic gloves, a lot of those do need a high-powered computer, and you're tethered to like an air compressor, basically. A lot of mannequins do have sensors, or they're attached to computers. And then lower fidelity mannequins, you might not need any of that. So I think it really does depend on the simulator you're talking about.
And the question about consideration of evaluating.
Self-efficacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-efficacy. That's really interesting. I love that question too, because I do like to include measures of self-efficacy, sometimes just confidence in simulation training. We have found like a recent study that we did where we looked at medical resident training. We found that confidence was actually inversely related to their performance, which is very interesting. So I would never use just confidence to say whether or not people had learned a task. Always some sort of performance measure would be preferred in my mind, or learning outcome would be preferred, because just self-reported self-efficacy or self-reported confidence might not get to that. I do think it is important to know if somebody feels confident and like they have the ability to do a task, because if they don't, then they might not attempt it. And that's very important. So it's a more complex question that I feel like it's great to bring up this area.
And in the chat, we have a collaboration offer there for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm always open to collaborations. I'll skip the other submitted questions, and I would also like to thank SOCOM for sponsoring the research project that we did. But if you have any questions or collaboration opportunities, feel free to reach out to my email here.
So there's a SRS event going on here in Orlando, evidently later this month. I assume that's maybe the storm. Is that the Storm Restoration Conference? What is our Society of Robotic Surgery? Probably, I'm guessing. Yeah, in Orlando. And one of our attendees is going to be present and was anyway. Aaron would love to reach out to you?
Yes, yeah, please do reach out.
And then Jennifer's asking about the study that you mentioned on the inverse relationship between self-efficacy and competency.
So that we just published part of it in Medical Teacher. If you email me, I can give you more information on it. I don't remember if we published that part or not, because this was part of a bigger study. But if anyone's interested in any of the stuff I've talked about, feel free to email me.
And I don't know if you've already put your email in the chat, but
I will do that as well.
If you would do that, that'd be great, because I suspect you're going to have quite a few of our guests that will want to follow up with you about various things. I'm guessing you'll be at ITSEC 2024. Is that a safe assumption? Will you be presenting? Do you know?
So. I will be trying to be there. I actually will be out on maternity leave at that point. So,
wow.
I love going to ITSEC, though. I hate to miss it. It's one of my favorite conferences.
Understandable. Priorities first. So will you be at TSIS next week? Do you go to the TSIS?
I don't typically get to go to TSIS, but oh yes, thank you for adding my email there as well. But yeah, I'm very open to other collaborations or just seeing what other simulations are going on. I know that Orlando, the simulation community is so strong, and I'm sure there are people doing things there in medical simulation that I'm not aware of, and would love to just do lab visits or something just to find potential collaborators.
Well, you have an official invitation from the Central Florida Tech Grove to absolutely arrange that and to get you over here. I hopefully you may be able to come over for our Medical Simulation Innovation Harvest Day. I mentioned that in my opening remarks. That is going to be on July 18th. So for those of you that might be interested, it is an all-in-person event, unfortunately, because we will have couple of dozen companies actually in Tech Grove showcasing their medical sim capability. We are doing this in partnership with Defense Health Agency, Modeling and Simulation Training Office, which is one of our funders and customers at Tech Grove. But perhaps around that, Shannon, if you're available, we can get you over or at any time for some visits. And it's an open invitation to any of you if you're going to be in Orlando for something. And we welcome you to come visit Tech Grove. Welcome you to come visit University of Central Florida. Happy to help set that up as well. We are right up on the hour here. Not seeing, I'm just checking one more time to see if there's any other questions. I think that we have addressed most of them. There was one more that came in. How do you foresee technology catching up to medical as a treatment and as treatments and procedures change drastically, which
right, yeah,
ready simulation, that's tough keeping it up current, right?
Oh, 100%. I feel this, and I'm sure everybody else in the simulation community does as well. By the time you get something funded to develop or study, it feels like the technology's already moved on. So I think that just trying to keep a baseline about what's working and what might not be working now, but what needs development needs to happen in different areas. For example, haptics. It might not be appropriate to use haptics for for certain medical training tasks right now, but as the capabilities in that technology develop, keep revisiting and seeing what works. So it just takes a lot of iterative development from a community, and so that's why I'm grateful to be invited to this this Tech Grove community.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you, and thank you all for joining us. We will be doing another Tech Grove Connect next month. Don't have the topic, the team quite confirmed yet, but that will be out there shortly, and you'll be getting communications from NTSA about that, as well as if you're on our Tech Grove communications list, you'll be getting it from us as well. So Dr. Bailey, Shannon, thank you again. It's a pleasure to meet my neighbor down the road, pretty much here, and I look forward to continuing to engage with you. All of you have a great rest of the week, and for those of you that are going to be here in Orlando for TSIS next week, we look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much.